And good morning, everyone. Welcome to your morning briefing for Wednesday, the 14th of May, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Thanks for being here. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway. Jared. All right. So President Trump was in Saudi Arabia, or I guess he maybe still be over there on a Middle East tour. He announced a big foreign direct investment program here from Saudi Arabia. What's going on?
Yes, he said he secured $600 billion worth of investments from Saudi Arabia. I've seen numbers as high as almost $1 trillion. They haven't released the full list yet, but they did release a small list, and that includes billions into data centers, billions into energy infrastructure, a few billion into a new high-capacity IV fluid manufacturing facility in Michigan. And at the same time, the U.S. agreed to sell $142 billion worth of military equipment. And I mean, you name it, it's part of that bill. This includes training as well. So, and even the White House is saying this is the largest defense package ever sold. So that is actually an historic milestone.
Interesting. You know, what I also find interesting is that high capacity IV fluid manufacturing site in Michigan, there are still reports of saline shortages in the United States because I don't know how many saline production facilities we have, but the main one is in North Carolina that was disrupted by the hurricane there last year. And apparently they're still trying to ramp production back up. Jared, you and I were talking before the show. I hesitate to say this is in preparation for war, but whenever you see medical readiness or medical production ramp up, I don't think you can discount that. So maybe there's an added benefit there of being able, if we've got a saline shortage today under normal circumstances, then we will definitely have one in a period of conflict. Yeah. Bears noting here. All right, coming up in Congress today, House Homeland Security is holding a hearing on the 2026 Homeland Security budget for DHS. We will monitor that. House Appropriations is having, this may get testy, an oversight hearing of the federal judiciary. Republicans may be going after or trying to get to the writing a sternly worded letter to these judges. And then over in Senate Finance, hearings to examine trade in critical supply chains. Moving on to Senate Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, said that federal law enforcement will, quote unquote, find out if they attempt to arrest 3 New Jersey Democrats who were involved in this scuffle and the alleged assault last Friday in Newark, New Jersey at this detention facility for illegal aliens. He said, quote, they'll find out. They'll find out. They'll find out. That's a red line. It's a red line. It's very clear. He continues, they know better than to go down that road, and it's been made loudly and abundantly clear to the Trump administration. We're not going to be intimidated by their tactics or try to force principled opposition from not standing up to their extremism. As I said in the chat, scary words indeed. I'm not exactly sure what Hakeem Jeffries could do other than maybe try to drag a bunch of Trump administration officials into Congress. It does not strike me as extremely likely that these 3 members of Congress are going to be arrested. I've seen people say that there's a certain level of immunity for these Democrats, but that's only in the course of their normal duties. This was outside the course of their official actions. This was during a protest, and again, alleged trespass and also alleged assault of federal law enforcement officials. We could be surprised. Maybe they will be arrested. I don't know. We'll see. But this is certainly going to ramp things up if these Democrats do actually get arrested. I'm reliably informed that no one is above the law. Moving on to our roll-ups. Speaking of no one being above the law, this Wisconsin judge was formally indicted. Jared, what's going on?
Yes, this is the judge that was initially arrested for blocking an ICE arrest. A federal grand jury indicted her, allowing the charges to go forward, and she will be in court tomorrow morning. A different federal judge, also, she's over in Pennsylvania, District Judge Stephanie Haynes. She ruled yesterday that the Trump administration can use the Enemy Aliens Act to deport Tren de Aragua members. She also lifted a temporary deportation block in her district, pending bilingual notification to the illegal immigrant and the and an opportunity to be heard for any objections. And on the federal level, the United States Geological Survey plans to issue a $5 million grant to states that find critical minerals in mine waste deposits. And the grant can be for surface or subsurface level development, particularly around former mines. The USGS is going to use all of these findings to develop a national mine waste inventory as well. And here on the screen, we've got a map of inactive mines, which you can see are all over the country, particularly in the West and particularly around Appalachia. Now, the reason this is important and why that grant would be so small is that most of these are, like, when it says mine waste, what they're talking about is the minerals that were not used out of that mine. So if you're mining for zinc and you come across mining for zinc in like the 1800s, as was very common, then you would just toss a lot of material that you didn't know how to use, like germanium, gallium, vanadium. Here, they're all at surface level. We have literal tons of the stuff. It's just a matter of developing or of sifting through it, finding what's in there, pulling it out, and actually developing it, using it for actually establishing critical minerals. And most of these actually run. Most of these critical minerals are actually around the very common use minerals like zinc, copper, and iron. So all of these mines potentially have, enough to make a stockpile worth, many years.
Interesting.
All right. And moving over onto the global roll-up, Taiwan's president broke Asian diplomatic norms yesterday, just incredibly. He called for Japanese regional leadership. And he said specifically because the two shared deep historical bonds. For the last 80 years, that's been quite a third rail over in Asia. Lai is most specifically concerned that the international community did not stop Chinese drills in the East and South China Seas or the Taiwan Strait, and he further called for Taiwan, the Philippines, and the U.S. to directly counter China's military actions in those seas. So that's about as mask off as you can get as far as the Chinese are concerned. He's effectively asking for Japanese imperialism. That's how the Chinese are going to take this. Mm-hmm. Right. And speaking of China, Brazil's central bank president is going to sign a currency swap agreement with his counterpart in the People's Bank of China. They're over in Beijing right now as part of that China CELAC conference. And Brazil's central bank is mimicking its arrangement with the U.S. Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve and International Monetary Authority's repo facility. And lastly, the Treasury Department issued more sanctions on Iranian oil shippers. These were 17 different entities all across Asia, and two of these 17 were ships. Now, all these are shipping over to China's small refineries called teapot refineries. This is business as usual, and we're seeing they're crushing the Chinese ability to actually build up or even refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems to me like it's two birds with one stone. Not only you're inducing more pain on Iranian oil production, but you're also potentially blocking or having some deterrent effect on future oil exports to China. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on here. All right. So yesterday we talked about this ongoing protest and activist campaign in Newark, New Jersey, outside of this GEO Group run detention facility, which is under contract with ICE to hold illegal aliens while they're processed prior to their deportation. I told you we'd get you a map. It turns out they have a map right there on their website. And so GEO Group runs a total of 50 facilities across the country in total. These are for-profit prisons and detention facilities, but 10 of these are currently contracted with ICE. And so they obviously could become targets for protests and direct action or activism. These 10, and I'll just roll through the list here. I'll I'll just tell you the cities here: Aurora, Colorado; Pompano Beach, Florida; Baldwin, Michigan; Newark, New Jersey; Phillipsburg, Pennsylvania; several in Texas: Pearsall, Conroe, Karnes City, and Del Rio; and finally Tacoma, Washington. The facilities at greatest risk of being targeted are those either in the center of or within a reasonable distance from these progressive bastions, with an abundance of activists, and also, maybe more importantly, political and legal support, or political and legal cover, like we've seen in Newark, New Jersey. So the facilities at highest risk of being targeted by protests are in Aurora, Colorado; Broward, Florida; Newark, New Jersey, obviously; and Tacoma, Washington. Now, the facility in Newark is obviously continued to be targeted. However, in Tacoma, I haven't seen anything recently. There was a march, or there was supposed to be a march, I believe over May Day, at this Northwest detention facility outside Tacoma. And this is important because this facility has been repeatedly targeted by Antifa groups. And probably the most infamous case you'll probably remember, back in 2019, there was an attack, and this guy named Willem Van Spronsen had a Molotov cocktail, and he was trying to throw this thing at a propane tank in order to cause an explosion and damage the facility. I don't know if they're going to do a jailbreak or what after that, or try to. He ended up being shot and killed by police, and that was in 2019. So Tacoma, Washington, obviously will continue to be a hotspot. Moving on here to some the SNAP benefits. If you haven't seen it, the Republicans have a proposal for reducing the federal budget, and they're trying to offload some of the SNAP funding to these states. And among other things, they want to push state governments to cover up to 25% of this Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program SNAP costs. That includes food stamps. All 23 Democrat governors oppose this. Obviously, they say it's an impossible goal. In a letter, they write, quote, "The notion that the states will respond by backfilling," they're talking about these spending cuts, "by backfilling with state resources is simply inaccurate and impossible." Also, the National Grocers Association also criticized the plan. They say that it would put hundreds of thousands of jobs at risk because those jobs are indirectly supported by SNAP benefits. Really goes to show you just how much of the U.S. economy is dependent on federal spending. This is a huge priority for the Trump administration to move low and no productivity programs and jobs away from the public sector, put them back in the private sector where they can be high productivity jobs. And I think this is a part of what's going on. So under this plan specifically, states would pick up at a minimum 5% of the total SNAP funding. When someone registers for SNAP, they do that at the state level, but it is federally funded. And what the Trump administration, or what Republicans rather here, are saying is that if your state has a payment error rate of over 10%, then you have to pick up 25% of the SNAP funding. If your payment error rate is below 10%, then you're only on the hook for 5% here. And it seems to me like Republicans are just trying to give these states some skin in the game here. Currently, I believe more than half of U.S. states currently have a payment error rate of over 10%. And so forcing over half of all U.S. states to cover 25% of SNAP funding will be, I think Republicans say this will save like $155 billion over 10 years. So that burden will be placed on the states, and it will be a burden for states. However, the Trump administration is obviously trying to force these states to decrease their payment error rates and also, again, have some skin in the game and try to work towards getting these people to graduate from their dependencies on this program. Exactly what is a SNAP payment error? So I believe a SNAP payment error is giving someone too much money or giving someone who is ineligible a payment. I'm sure there's a better definition we can find, but it probably is exactly how it sounds here. All right, moving on. Jared, so DIA released, or maybe some of this stuff maybe at some point declassified. But Defense Intelligence Agency is making the case for Golden Dome, and this is this kind of next generation missile defense system. And apparently they want Golden Dome because we're not just dealing with ICBM threats, we're dealing with potentially, and again, worst case scenario, potentially dealing with Chinese nuclear weapons fired from satellites that are in orbit, which traditional missile defense is not going to hit. So what's going on?
Okay, so yes, this graphic was at least released yesterday, probably produced and declassified quite a while ago. But these are the projected missile threats over the next 10 years, and these are threats to the homeland. Now, this is to justify developing the Golden Dome missile defense system that's been a subject of debate in Congress for quite a while. I've been noticing it as we're covering down for Robert here. Now, the most pressing threat in this graphic is China, who the DIA, they expect to develop the fractional orbital bombardment system and have dozens of these available over the next 10 years. Now, it's a little bit hard to see, but if you look up in the top right corner, you can see a small globe with an orange ring around it. And we've posted this in the early warning network, so you can actually blow it up to full scale and take a closer look at this as well. But what it does is a missile flies at low Earth orbit to strike wherever it needs to strike on the Earth. And now I think a couple of years ago, we covered something very similar for it, probably a vehicle that was tested for it, where the Chinese launched a missile and then the U.S. government said that they didn't detect it until it was too late. I remember you covering it. I think it was before I came onto the team. But yes, this thing rides in low Earth orbit, and that makes it extremely hard to detect. And you can see at the bottom of the graph that this orange dashed arrow here, they're expecting these to be launched and then shot over the South Pole. So even though this is about Golden Dome, this is about far more than Golden Dome. To defend against this kind of attack, the DIA is effectively saying we need to restructure how all of the Defense Department actually runs. Southern Command needs a lot more ISR assets. They need to be watching this area, and it will likely require taking ballistic missile defense destroyers out of the Asian Pacific and assigning them to Southern Command. That way you get them there monitoring and prepared to intercept in the event that any of these happen, because a fractional orbital bombardment system, it's the payloads can differ, but it's the non-detectability that's the biggest issue. Mm-hmm. And all of this, additionally, Space Force has been talking about developing additional sensors and interceptors, so that will likely be added on to that. And I expect a large push for establishing an Antarctic presence. That may be down in Argentina near the Antarctic Circle and not on Antarctica proper. But nevertheless, I expect that that's going to have to happen. You're going to need sensors down there for actual early warning. And all of this needs to be accomplished in the next 10 years. Now, when you look at the three business qualities of the three business pillars of fast, cheap, and quality, we need it fast. We need it to work, so it's got to be quality. It's not going to be cheap. I do expect defense spending to rise significantly over this. And one way that they can kind of push out the timeline for fast is by really containing China. So I expect a diplomatic push to contain China, prevent them from building these as much as possible in order to extend the timeline to actually get this developed and get people trained on it.
Mm-hmm. If I recall correctly, it didn't Hegseth request like almost $1 trillion in increased funding for the Defense Department or something like that?
I don't remember. I know he's been just slashing programs left and right, and I'm almost certain that funding is going to be reallocated.
Yeah. Well, I forget exactly what the numbers are. Maybe that's over the next 10 years or something. However, if I recall correctly, General Richardson, who was the previous Southcom commander, said they have like 1% of their ISR needs are actually funded. So we're talking about, and if you think about the entire world, not a lot of money is getting dumped into defense of Latin America or U.S. assets in Southern Command. So I don't know, Jared. This does not seem very realistic, but I guess we'll see.
I think so. There's one quick question: is DIA fear mongering for money? I don't think so. The Golden Dome has been talked about for at least since Trump took office, but realistically, the inadequacy of homeland missile defense has been talked about for years. It is intentionally kept at a lower level so that deterrence can play into deterrence, saying, oh yeah, you could potentially hurt us a lot more than we are prepared to take. And that's no longer an acceptable position in Congress.
Jared, also, you bring up Argentina. Last year, General Richardson, she had made multiple trips down to Argentina, and she's since retired, and I forget what her replacement's name is. However, she was at that Argentine naval facility down in Ushuaia, which is near the southern tip down there. They say it's the southernmost year-round inhabited city or something like that in the Western Hemisphere. It's close. It's on the Beagle Channel. It's fairly close to Antarctica. It's a neat place, by the way. If you ever get a chance to go, you should. It's cool. Tierra del Fuego is great. But Jared, you bring that up because maybe this is an opportunity for the U.S. to put assets down there they've already got the facilities. I'm sure it's just a matter of construction.
I was just thinking that we covered, it was probably a month ago now, Admiral Halsey is the Southern Command commander, and he went down there to inspect that facility. And it is a naval facility, which you would need a naval facility to host ballistic missile defense destroyers down in that area. Mm-hmm. All the pieces are there. We just got to put them together.
Yeah. And maybe more importantly, there's a president down there who's willing to cooperate on that. All right. It seems to me like Argentine politics should be a target for China at this point. All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks for that, Jared. And we do have some questions we'll get to this morning, starting with, is there a link to the Intel update? Yeah, we produce the report every morning that goes out to subscribers. If you would like to join, you can try us out for a free 7-day trial. Head over to www.earlywarningnetwork.com. We don't sell coffee. We don't sell Early Warning Network Bibles or cryptocurrencies. There's no Brain Force 5000 around here. We have a news and information sharing app on your smartphone, also via the web, and you can get a 7-day free trial to that. And join the community. That's the biggest thing. There's a large growing community here, thousands of members now in the network, and we are trying to facilitate connections so that we can make sure the information sharing is happening at the local level, at the state and local level. That's our mission here. Jared, Robert, and I, and our other guys can cover what's happening at the national and global level. What we can't do is help you make sense of the changes and risks at the local level. And we're trying to empower you to do that, because really, we can talk about Beijing. We can talk about Chinese nuclear weapons in space. We can talk about what's going on in Russia and DC and wherever else. But you will be impacted by the local effects of these strategic events. And if you don't understand those local effects, things that are happening in your county, that's what you actually prepare for. And so we try to cover the national and global and geostrategic stuff and empower you to do that at the state level within the network. We also don't sell coffee yet. Don't make us sell coffee. earlywarningnetwork.com. Sign up and join us. We'd love to have you. All right, Jared, any other questions? Could the drug cartels and mass immigration be the expeditionary forces for Mexico for the reconquista of the southwestern U.S.? I would say no. Next question. Whatever happened to the new Russian bomb tech? Does a Golden Dome protect against that? I guess, are you talking about the Russian hypersonic missiles, or is there something else?
We can wait for her to address that if she wants, but the hypersonics, I'm so tired of hearing about hypersonics. So hypersonics are just faster missiles. And when you're talking about land attack, they are on a ballistic course. It's just a matter of the math to get the intercept down. Hypersonics are only a real threat when it comes to something like anti-ship missiles. when it comes
Well,
to
Jared,
even
what about putting a nuclear warhead on a hypersonic missile? Because I know the Russians have either
all that
talked
does
about it or
all that does is shorten the timeline. Hypersonics is just anything over Mach 5 inside of the atmosphere. So if it's on a ballistic course and you have detected it, it's just a matter of getting the math down and all of the.
what if it's on an over the horizon course? So when we talk about ballistic missiles, you're talking about something. It shoots up in the sky, the Earth rotates around beneath it, and then it comes down. Okay, that's its ballistic course. What about over the horizon hypersonics? That seems like a much larger threat, especially considering that our missile defense cannot shoot those things down, and air defense cannot shoot those things down.
Some of them can. Some of them can. And as far as the over the horizon, that's why I was bringing up, hey, this Golden Dome thing, it's great as a close-in weapon system effectively for the homeland. But what you really need to do if you're the DIA and the Defense Department is to set defense in depth. That's why you get your destroyers out there. That's why you set up an Antarctic sensor system, because what that does is extend your horizon. You start looking over, and now you've got 5,000 miles instead of 8,000 miles to detect and kill this thing. And all of that is much more doable if you have assets pre-positioned, like we do with China. The ballistic missile defense destroyers are over in Japan. Most of them, at least most of them. A lot of them are also spread throughout the world, but bulk are there. We do that for that exact reason, so that they immediately intercept it, or at least you get an early first shot, and then you scale it back. After that, the Space Force has not been shy about just saying, yeah, we're looking for interceptors, we're looking for jamming capability, we want to place this stuff in space because all of these are space threats. So now you get shooting up from the surface and down from space to intercept these things there. It is actually it is entirely doable. Just it's harder. That's all. And it part of the reason this gets on me is people have been talking about hypersonics for years and about how they're this 800-foot giant, and they're really not. It's just a little more difficult, and you don't want to get hit with them. But at the same time, they're not really as proliferated as one would think, because you have to make an incredibly hardened material to get this thing through the atmosphere at Mach 5. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other Russian tech I've seen talked about, this was in Congress, they were asking why the Golden Dome, a missile defense system, would not protect against the supposed Russian nuclear torpedo. And that would be, well, it's because it's a torpedo. They're not, you don't shoot those with missile systems.
Because it's underwater.
Yeah.
Look how smart I am. All right. Could the U.S. purchase islands off of France in the southern Indian Ocean to form LPOP to defend against space threats? Jared?
I wouldn't see the need for purchasing. When you're talking about France, they're a key ally. They're not Five Eyes, but they're NATO. We would station, if we really needed to, we'd work out a status of forces agreement where we just station ships there. It's basically the same thing that we did with Japan and with Spain and Italy.
No, but these Chinese FOBs, if they're coming over the South Pole, then they will be coming over Latin America, and we may not necessarily need to put space threat detection assets in the Indian Ocean.
This is true. However, if you're going to start developing this defense in depth grid, essentially, then the enemy will want to avoid where the sensors are. And Indian Ocean is not well watched just because there are hardly any threats there. Everything is Africa, China, and the Middle East, which covered plenty on land, and then Australia, which is a friend. So there are some things there to watch it, but it's not like there just are not that many threats there. Mm-hmm. All right. Got a couple more questions that came in. All right.
By the way, yeah, I apologize if I said Hakeem Jeffries is he's the House Minority Leader. All right. Did you miss the estimated time until the dome is completed and in service? Jared, I don't think we have an ETA, correct?
No, they're still working on what exactly the
It's
requirements
not even
will
funded.
be.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so they have to do this in the next 10 years per the DIA.
Mm-hmm. All right, wouldn't space-based platforms be better for exo-atmospheric ballistic threats?
Yeah, it's all part of a pie. You don't have one killer system. You have a bunch of systems that can intercept in different phases of the flight.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're talking about putting missile defense in space, missiles in space.
The Space Force generals have talked about that. In all of the panels I cover, I see them talking about it all the time. And they even a couple of years ago, they were talking about potentially having Space Force do commercial traffic assets up there as well. So effectively spaceships guiding commercial traffic, which being Space Force will be weaponized.
All right, and Ben says, I think the U.S. has its own space-based hypersonic missile capability. Assuming this is so, maybe ensuring mutually assured destruction. Does this supplant the need for the Golden Dome? Jared?
No. Ballistic missiles travel at hypersonic speeds. What you're talking about has essentially been the status quo for the last 80 years, 70-ish years. As long as the USSR and US have had nukes pointed at each other, that's been the standard. And the reason that we're pushing on Golden Dome right now is because the US government no longer believes that the level of deterrence we have will effectively deter the Chinese and Russians. They think that they're willing to take the hits and also just try to get past the existing homeland defense system.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Jared, thanks for that. I'm glad we have you around. All this stuff is way too sciencey for me. All right. Well, everyone, that's going to do it for today's morning briefing. We appreciate your support. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. This is the end of the morning briefing, but the show goes on over on the Early Warning Network app. Head over to www.earlywarningnetwork.com. Sign up for a free 7-day trial. Join up in your state, get connected with other people, and start talking about what's going on in your state issues. We are here to help facilitate that. And with that, everyone, we'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.